What would you say to those leaders out there who would tell you that it's soft, it's ineffective, it takes ages? Just tell them what you want, when you need it, how fast they can do it. What would you say to a leader who's still in that mindset?
If you're putting truth at the center of stuff, if you're really using kindness to build that psychological safety, what you'll find is the evidence points to better collaboration, more innovation, more productivity, better retention levels, higher profit levels. All of that, you can track that back to kindness and empathy.
Graham, welcome and lovely to have you here on the Fall Forward podcast. It's so lovely to have you after what's been a long bank holiday weekend in the UK, where probably people feel like they need to talk about what we're going to be talking about today, which is kindness and the role of kindness within the world of leadership. Graham, lovely to have you. For lots of our members and listeners across the world, I'd love, if it's okay, just a bit of an introduction to yourself. Tell them about your background before we then dive into the theme and the topic and the book that sits behind the conversation today.
Yeah, sure. So I spend most of my time either writing books or speaking and running workshops. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm the founder of a company called Think Productive, which has been going since 2009. We have offices all over the world. And what Think Productive is about is really helping people to do their best work. So we started as primarily a productivity-based company. I did this book called How to Be a Productivity Ninja, which became a global bestseller. And so we kind of started the business based around that. And then it's developed over the years. We now run a lot of leadership and management training. We run all kinds of programs on things like how to cut out a lot of your meetings and get more time back to do the work that really matters. We train people on Microsoft Teams, all kinds of different facets of working life, really. And then that's the main business, Think Productive. And then most of what I'm doing is actually going out and doing keynotes and talks, really based around the different books that I've written. But particularly at the moment, I have written my sixth and final book, which is called Kind, which we're going to talk about. And so really a lot of my own personal work has been moving in that direction over the last couple of years, really. Just talking to people about the importance of kindness at work, how to practice kindness, and really the most important part of the story, what that means for developing high-performing teams, getting psychological safety, and actually just driving performance. I think people often think that it's a choice between performance or kindness, and actually they go hand in hand. So I've been telling that story a lot over the last couple of years, and that's the main part of my work. You said at the beginning, like after the bank holiday, that's a good time to talk about kindness. I feel like every day is a good day to talk about kindness.
Yes, you're right. You absolutely right, Graham. Correct. You're happy to be corrected. So for sure. Look, we were talking before we went live around this, but I feel like kindness is often frowned upon in the professional world. But why is it now that kindness can be a real, I suppose, differentiator for leaders in the workplace? Why now? And what should we be looking out for from that perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of aspects to why now. So why now in the world is there's a lot going on politically, which is deemed as being quite unkind. So it feels like now is a very good time to be talking about kindness. I think in the workplace, though, there's lots of studies, which I talk about in the first half of the book, that really point towards how kindness and empathy drive trust. Trust is a one-to-one thing between two people. And once you have trust, it then drives what Amy Edmondson terms psychological safety. And psychological safety is a one-to-many aspect. So the idea is that if you feel able to speak up, to share slightly riskier or bolder ideas, to challenge other people, challenge their ideas, then what you find from that is you get high levels of performance, you get high levels of retention, you get higher creativity and innovation, and you also get high levels of productivity. And when you look at how do you achieve psychological safety at work, what the studies point to is a lot of the different aspects of it all really come down to kindness. So kindness and empathy are really at the center of building what ends up becoming a high-performing team that's more profitable than not. And so, yeah, when we think, we often do have this idea that kindness is frowned upon, or this idea that everything we do at work is dog eat dog, and if you're competitive, you can't be kind, and all of that. And I think a lot of that's a fallacy. So, of course, you might be competing with another organization for the same clients and stuff. But what's happening inside your organization? It really shouldn't be about dog eat dog competition. It should be about collaboration, working together. Really putting the team and the organization forward ahead of your own interests. And you find that organizations that can do that end up with much better culture and much higher levels of performance. So I think we are in a competitive world, but actually kindness, and that idea of interdependence rather than independence is really what drives better communities and cultures, and sort of builds a higher performance off the back of that.
You remind me of a scenario, Graham. I went for a promotion in an old role, and I was told that I wasn't going to get the CEO job because I wasn't nasty, or I didn't have an edge. I wasn't cutting, and I wasn't prepared to be that person. I didn't believe that that's how you should lead. And so I suppose this question is kind of related to that, which is that so many of us as leaders are asked to bare their teeth, or to be harsher, or not kind, I suppose, in their leadership. How do you lead with empathy? How do you lead with kindness, but not sacrifice productivity or success or outcomes? How do you do that? How do you balance that equation?
Okay, so here's the thing. So what that person who didn't give you that role uh, is really wanting isn't nastiness, but the edge is about truth, right? So you need to be able to really communicate truth in situations. And we think that the only way to do that is by being nasty, and that's what gives you the edge. I'd argue that a much greater edge is to be able to deliver truth, but to do it with grace. And I think for me, that's a really good definition of kindness: truth and grace. And I think where we often get confused is the difference between being kind and being nice. So what you don't want in business is a nice culture, which is very people pleasy. Nice is about telling people what they want to hear. Kindness is about telling people what they need to hear. And sometimes that is harsh. And sometimes that does involve letting somebody go, or interrogating someone's ideas, or being critical, or giving people feedback that's brave and bold in order for that person to grow. And so there's two ways you can do that. You can do that with toxic truth, that whole thing of I say it like it is, man, and I don't hold back, I don't pull any punches. Well, that's fine, but that's not very caring. And so you can deliver someone toxic truth once, and then by the second or third time they're getting demoralized, and then good people walk out the door. But you can deliver truth with grace too, right? And so you can deliver truth in a way that actually is for the other person, which is really what grace really means. And you can do it in a way that leaves people feeling inspired to learn and change and grow and get better. So I think we often think about harshness and edge as being like the only way to drive performance. Actually, the best leaders are the ones who skillfully and bravely and boldly hold boundaries and deliver truth and get the best out of people, but they do it in a way that people really respect, and that people get that buy-in around it. So I've worked with so many leaders over the years who just exhibit those qualities, but do you know, the thing is, they often exhibit them in a way that's quite quiet. So the title of the book is The Quiet Power of Kindness at Work. And the reason I chose that for the little subtitle was, I think often kindness is quite quiet. Often those moments are one-to-one, they're private. Kindness can be quite intimate. And so by its very nature, it doesn't get shared so much. And a lot of the unkindness is really bold, and it's also really interesting. Think about all the best cinematic characters, in the last 50 years. It's you got the Wolf of Wall Street, you got Mr. Burns in The Simpsons, Shark Tank and Dragon's Den. All these characterizations of business, the most interesting ones tend to be the bad guys. We find it more interesting. It shouts louder. But actually what's happening day to day is that, and I'm sure many people listening to this will will relate. There are lots of people around you who are just quietly getting on with the business of being kind, and they're building trust and they're building psychological safety, and you would do anything for them. You'd walk over hot coals for them. But they're not leading with fear. They're leading with that truth and grace, and building that trust and loyalty along the way.
You mentioned quiet leadership. Often leaders, I would argue, misinterpret the word quiet, because we all have different leadership styles, don't we, as leaders? And I'm wondering if you have some advice around how you can translate kindness and quiet kindness into all different styles of leadership, because it's not an easy thing to do sometimes if you are not, if that's not your standard operating model, shall we say, as a leader, or if you're trying to become more kind or to lead with quiet kindness.
I mean, I think you can have very extroverted people who are also very kind. I don't think it's the quiet people are always kind and the louder people are not. And in fact, there's a study from the University of Sussex that found that extroverts are generally more, their propensity for kindness is higher than introverts, because extroverts are more gregarious. They're connecting more with just more people, so they're sensing more opportunities to be kind. So I think for me, it's more that like the sort of the spirit of kindness often runs much more quietly than the spirit of what I call in the book, the business bastards, and this idea of like how compelling is the story of the sort of unruly genius who breaks all the rules, and we just have to just allow their bad behavior because they're going to change the world, right? Like it's such a compelling idea, and we're fascinated by it. And I think part of the reason we're fascinated by it as well is that they're breaking all the rules that we follow. So we have a little daydream about what would our dark side look like if we just broke all those rules, or would society collapse if everyone behaved that way? So I just think it's more interesting. Like the baddies in films are more interesting than the goodies. And so that's why I think there is this kind of quiet undercurrent of kindness. But back to your question, I think with every leader, and there's one exception which I'll come to. With every leader, we should see kindness as a practice, and we should see it as something that we can practice it and we can get better at it, just like writing is a practice, just like yoga is a practice. So we have to see it as a practice. And they found that empathy is an elastic neuro trait. So what that means is we can all learn to be more empathetic. And then here's the exception. The only people who can't do that is psychopaths. So basically, unless you're a psychopath, then you have the ability through kindness practice to learn to be more empathetic, to connect with people in a better and deeper way. And in doing that, you're going to enrich not only the personal connections you have with people, but the world around you and the culture around you as well. So I think, no matter your personal style, as long as you're not a psychopath, all the science points to the fact that you can actually learn this stuff, you can get better at this stuff. And I kind of see it like peeling an onion. I started writing this book about 4.5, 5 years ago. And in that time, I've been talking to a lot of people, researching, thinking, and I've been kind of surrounded, and I've been in this kind of kindness bubble for this last sort of 4 or 5 years. And in doing so, I kind of really recognize that it's like a rod for my own back personally, because now my email signature has the word kind in it. My company name has the word productive in it. So basically, I can never be unkind. I can never send the snarky email. And also I have to turn up to all meetings on time and be productive, right? So so I've been thinking about this stuff a lot, and I really do feel like it's like peeling an onion. Like the more I work on this stuff and the more I'm talking to people about some of these ideas around kindness, the more I'm seeing more opportunities for me to be kind in my day to day. So I think the more we surround ourselves with this stuff, the more it changes culture actually, and the more it inspires everybody to just dig that little bit deeper.
You mentioned something in there that kind of sparked my interest. So the story that the villain or the one going against the tide is the one that we pay attention to, but underneath that, there's this increasing push of kindness. I wonder what your view is at the moment. I mean, if we look in the world right now, if we look across most of the Western world, most leaders, I'd say, are less kind probably than we've seen over years, or agendas are less kind in the way that they are being delivered. Yet in the corporate world, there is a known push for leaders to become more kind. Those things don't really sit hand in hand. Why do you think that is? And also, kind of, what's your view on that bigger push, I suppose, for those I suppose more renegade kind of style leaders who seem to be getting all the attention and are in control of things?
We're talking about Trump here,
We
right?
think of Trump and others. Yeah, of course. I mean, he's not the only one, right? So,
Yeah.
you look across European markets as well. That's pretty common message right now.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'd say politically, the last two big election results have been the Canadian one and the Australian one, both in the last kind of week or so. And both have seemed to be quite a pushback against renegade, slightly unkind, if you want to put it in those terms, leadership styles. Um, and I do think I think there's a disconnect, and also there's always a relationship between sort of macro politics and then what goes on corporately. So I do agree with you that there's there's not, like, if you read certain newspapers or certain media, you would get this idea that like every single company is having a massive backlash against DEI and equality and all these things. And like, of course, we just know that that's not the case. And obviously, some have tried to position themselves with that kind of anti-DEI thing, and a lot haven't. And I do think the other correlation, often, I was talking to someone a couple of weeks ago, CEO of an organization, and one of her board members had suddenly got very inspired by the Elon Musk chainsaw thing and was like, "Hey, let's just make cuts." And someone holding a chainsaw, it's such an arresting image, and it's very easy to understand. And I think that, for me, is the heart of the Trump appeal. When you think about Trump's early appeal, it was like build a wall. And for lots of people, when politics can be very disconnected from people, and I think politicians of all persuasions really struggle to translate, all this complex stuff of government and infrastructure and all these things into the real life of people's worlds. And when someone says build a wall, you go, well, I know what a wall is, and I can picture that. And it's a really simple, anything that's simple. I think, and back here in the UK, get Brexit done. What a simple 3-word slogan, take back control. These slogans are so simple, and they really, they just really encapsulate people's kind of thoughts and moods. Even Jeremy Corbyn didn't win an election, but became very popular with for the many, but not for the few. Is that right? Yeah, for the many, not the few. And these really simple slogans are, I think, just very important sort of tools to communicate. And I think it's really worrying that some of those slogans end up being then used in corporate life when, like, it's quite complicated. Like, a lot of we are losing a lot of nuance in the way that we think about stuff when we boil things down to simple slogans. So I think, for me, there's like a disconnect and also a connection. I think we need to be very wary about stuff that seems like it's too good to be true, or simple answers. And like, I think in general terms, the more that we can bang the drum for listening and understanding, for deep thinking, for nuance, for not just going with the kind of shallow social media version of something, but really trying to get deep into understanding something. I think that's where we end up building better companies and building better societies. And I think, there's a lot to be said for the kind of scrolly notion of our current attention spans. But like, I think the more that we can get away from that, spend time with people rather than online, and really listen and understand stuff, I think that's where stuff changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, you're preaching to the converted on that stuff, Graham. That's obviously what we're all about from a community perspective, being together to and create that space. And I
Yeah.
think the space where you can have the conversations, and I think that echoes back to your point earlier around creating an environment that is a space where you do feel able to put your hand up and give suggestions or feedback, and do so. And if you do it with kindness, then hopefully it's received in the way that benefits everybody, as opposed to the few. Thinking practically, so we've got leaders from some of the largest organizations in the world listening to this conversation. What can they think about on a day-to-day basis, or what practically can they be doing, Graham, to ensure that they're kind of bringing this kindness to life in a consistent way, or in a perhaps a more visual way for them with their staff? What should they be thinking of, and what tips or I suppose habits should they be thinking about?
Okay, so there's a million different places I could start in terms of like the tips and the tricks and kind of simple things that you can do that really drive kindness. Before I get into any of those, though, if you're a leader, your natural assumption when you start to think about how to drive kindness is you start to think about your team. You start to think about the culture, and you look outwards. It's like, who's over there? Who needs my help? How do I pay it forward? We think outwards. The first place to start for anyone, but particularly for leaders, when you're thinking about how can you drive kindness, is principle number 1 of the book, which is kindness starts with you. So we always think about kindness as being this external thing. But actually, the bit that we often miss is self-kindness. And that might mean, leaving on time. It might mean giving yourself a bit of a break sometimes. It might mean giving yourself, trying to be allowing more softness into the way that you're thinking and acting. It might mean, making sure that you take a full weekend to unplug even when you're really busy. And these things are really difficult, especially when you really feel busy and under pressure. It's really difficult to disconnect or give yourself and your body and your mind what you really need. And I think it's really difficult for a couple of reasons, which is fear and guilt, right? So we worry about how we're perceived. We feel guilty that other people are doing more than us. And we tell ourselves this whole bunch of stories in our heads, which ultimately boil down to scarcity. And so we're in the moment, everything's happening, 100 miles an hour, busy, busy, busy. And when we think about, can we be kind to ourselves? Just as when we think about being kind to someone else, we tell ourselves things like, there isn't enough time, or there isn't enough, or I am not enough. And all of that is a scarcity mindset. And what we need to do is flip that round. So the reason that the self-kindness is so important is when you start to practice self-kindness and really rigorously give yourself what you really need, then you start to turn that from a scarcity mindset into an abundant mindset. And the abundance mindset says, there is enough time, there is enough, I am enough. And guess what happens when you do that? You rewire your brain so that you're more likely to be in an abundance mindset for everybody else. So then you approach a colleague and you're in abundance, you're not in scarcity. And so when they tell you what they need, hey, you're in abundance mode, you're much more likely to spot that opportunity to be kind to them, and you're going to give them that kindness as a result. So you rewire your own brain, which helps you with that kindness. And also in that moment, so when someone sees you leave on time, even when things are busy, or when someone sees you take a full lunch break, or take time for yourself, or make sure you're still making time for your creative passion or whatever it is, you're role modeling kindness to them, right? So what they see from that is, hey, I get to leave on time and give myself what I need too. And so you avoid a whole lot of burnout and stress and everything else by the fact that as a leader, you're role modeling it. So if they see you, staying till 2 a.m, if they see you burning out, then they're much more likely to feel like, so and so is working in that way, I better do that too. That's the expectation here. And they'll copy that behavior. So I think, it's so easy to start with like, who else needs our help? But a much better and often much harder place to start is not letting yourself down and giving yourself what you need. So before we get into any of the sort of tips and tricks and stuff, I think kindness starts with you. If there's like one thing that people listening to this take away, it's like make some time to just listen to yourself, listen to your body, listen to your mind. Like, what do you need right now? And then just give yourself what you need, really unapologetically.
Yeah, it sounds so obvious when you say it, Graham, but of course it's so difficult to do on a on a daily basis when the board meeting follows the board meeting, follows the travel, follows the restructure, follows the transformation, follows the so yeah, it's nice to hear that that has to cut through, and again, you can't achieve any of those things if you don't allow yourself to be able to do them. So thank you for that. The theme of the Fall Forward podcast is trying to normalize this idea of failure, and we were interested to talk about kindness because of course, when somebody fails or when there is failure in an organization, you can have two approaches to that. Of course, you can learn and develop and grow and be kind and be gracious in that, or you can, of course, reprimand or go down the kind of the more negative side of that. So first, I'd love to understand your view on the role of failure in kindness, and then I'll have a follow-up question, which is probably more related to you in a second. But maybe just love to get your view on the importance or role of failure and how they're linked to kindness.
Yeah, well, I think maybe it's the other way around. It's the role of kindness in failure,
yes.
Right? So when we think about great innovations, often they're like the third or fourth version of the idea. So we have to take the failure and then we have to learn from that failure. And I think failure is a really difficult thing. Back to the fear and guilt thing again. All of us beat ourselves up when things don't go well. I worked for an amazing boss a few years ago, and she had this really brilliant phrase, which was, "I don't care if you screw up, as long as you own up and clear up." And this one simple phrase, it was like her mantra, and she repeated it all the time. And it really built in the culture like a real sense of ownership, but also a real sense that like a bit of risk taking, as long as it's calculated, is actually really encouraged. And screwing up is okay as long as we're learning from it, and that's kind of part of the process of innovation and getting somewhere better. There's a very innovative organization as well. And so I think there's, for me, something about how you deliver that message kindly. She was a very kind leader as well. And I think then it's what happens, it's very easy to say that and set that expectation. And then there will be a time when someone does screw up or someone experiments with something and it doesn't work. And it's how you, in that moment, then really praise and reward, not necessarily the results, if the results aren't great, but like praise and reward the effort, praise and reward the risk. Like really focus on how can you operate with kindness in those moments so that the person leaves that interaction. Perhaps they've learned something about what they're not going to do next time or what the project's not going to do next time. But they're also feeling, yeah, I did a good thing. Like I tried, I did, I think there's a real virtue when we're thinking about failure to then innovate or failure to then create. Like there's a real virtue in the trying rather than the achieving, because often the achieving happens accidentally through the trying. So I think kindness plays a huge role with all of that. And it again comes back to this definition of kindness that I often give of truth and grace. And I think when we want to interrogate ideas, if we want to improve on stuff, there's one of the quotes in the book is someone using this phrase benevolent critique, and it's someone called Sarah Stein Greenberg, who's head of D School, the design school at Stanford University. And this benevolent critique idea, she says, we want to be hard. We want to be hard on the designs and soft on the people. So great design comes from actually really like being rigorous and interrogating and being critical and really pulling stuff apart. And it's really difficult to do that if you're not giving grace to the people at the same time. So yeah, I think it just plays a huge role in all of that. And all of that is only possible when you're in an environment that feels psychologically safe, where people can take the risks, when people can, be bold and brave and take, perhaps sort of calculated risks. But you're not going to do that if you're in fear of making mistakes. And so that's for me where kindness can just play a huge role.
I liked that quote, the idea of almost separating the work from the person,
Yeah.
because just because you say something has failed, or it's just because something didn't work or isn't good enough or could be improved, that's not uh, that's not about personality, or it's not about the human. Often it's just the work, and so often those two things, we all link ourselves too closely probably to our work, and when we receive feedback or criticism or whatever it might be, or however it's delivered to us, we take that often, don't we, to our core, and actually we don't need to, if we have the right environment around us. So it's interesting that you highlighted that. The question I was interested to ask you, Graham, after that was: have you ever felt a time when you've led with kindness and it's backfired, or perhaps didn't lead to the outcome that you were expecting?
Yeah.
And maybe anything that you take away from that experience.
Yeah, there's one actually. Before that, I was just going to say, just on that depersonalization thing, about once every 2 years, I get an email from Elena, who's the managing director of Think Productive, my business partner and co-shareholder and stuff. About once every 2 years, she sends me an email that says, "Hey, I screwed up." It doesn't happen very often. But when it does, the tradition is I send her a response that basically says, "It's so lovely to know that you're human. Hooray!" And it's like, for me, the idea that it's possible that she could screw something up is something that's really important for me to be reminded about in the context of all the other successes that she's had, constantly. And so I think that for me is a really nice, sort of summary of that, splitting up the sort of work from the people. But yeah, in terms of my own experience, I'll be really candid here. So there was we had one staff member at Think Productive a few years ago who just didn't really buy into the whole culture. And the culture, so one of our corporate values is trust and kindness are our rocket fuel. And the whole thing is based on this principle that A, if we trust each other, and B, if we're really kind to each other, it eliminates, once you have trust, you don't need all the due diligence, right? So you get to just be like, I trust you, go and make decisions. They don't have to keep coming back and checking. You don't have to be monitoring their work. You give people more freedom and autonomy by giving people trust. So that's always been our culture, and we have some quite firm boundaries. We have a really good, KPIs, and we measure stuff. But at the same time, we give people a lot of freedom within that to really try and innovate and do things in the way that they think best. But we had one person who was just not really sort of buying into that, and wasn't so committed to it. And this person was underperforming, but also we kind of have this unwritten rule. We do like a 4-day week at Think Productive, and we kind of have this unwritten rule that if you're taking time off on one of those 4 days, you kind of make it back up. And this person wasn't really making the hours back up. In their head, it was like, well, Fridays is my day off, and I've taken those a time through the week, but hey, Fridays is my contracted day off, so I'm going to do that. And it was really starting to sort of build a bit of resentment and stuff. And so we did have some conversations about it, and basically that person, because they didn't really fit elsewhere, it came to a point where they just left for other reasons. So it wasn't even because of that. But it did feel like, there is sometimes a price to be paid by trusting people more than they trust you back. So that was quite an important kind of learning experience for me. But I think, that was the one exception over many years. And I think I stand by the idea that we get to choose which kind of culture we want to create, right? So the way I like to explain this is, if you imagine you're on the tube in London, and someone gets on, and they're asking for money, they're begging, they're saying, "Hey, I need money for a hostel, I'm homeless," that kind of thing. There's two schools of thought. One school of thought is, if you've got some cash on you and someone needs your help, help them. Okay, fine. There's another school of thought which says that person probably isn't homeless. Maybe they're trying to trick you. Maybe they don't really need the money. Maybe they're going to spend it all on booze, and that's not good. It's not the best way to help. And almost being suspicious of the sort of communication that's put in front of you. And you can get caught between those two ideas, and you can then decide, well, because I don't know, because I'm not totally sure that this person's genuine, then I'm going to hold back. And in that moment, it's like, like you have a split second really as they come down the carriage to choose whether you're going to act and be kind or not. And I used to get stuck in that too. And I used to be in this mode of like, I've got some money on me, but I don't quite know if it's genuine. So like, what should I do? And then I had this sort of moment one day where I thought, what world do I want to live in? And so it's not just about the interaction I'm having with this person who's walking down the carriage. It's like the other 10 people in the carriage, someone might be kind because they're following my lead. And I'd much rather that person be kind and follow my lead. And once in 50 or once in 100, we both give money to someone who doesn't really need it in that moment. But for the fact that for the other 49 out of 50 times, or the 99 out of 100 times or whatever, more people are inspired to be kind. So I think ultimately it's got to come down to culture. And I think ultimately when you do have people that don't fit your culture, and particularly if you don't have people who are, you're putting a lot of trust in them, but you're not getting a lot of trust back from them. I really do think you've got to really kindly, have that conversation with the person where you say, I think you're in the wrong place, and I think we need to do something about that. And so, you can sack people with kindness, and I think that's something that when people confuse nice and kind, we get into this thing of, well, we can't rock the boat. We need to just be nice all the time. But I do think, having mindfully sort of creating the right culture around you that supports that. Part of your job is to call out the people that don't fit in that culture, and kind of recognize that that kind of team might not be where everybody needs to be.
I really like the tube example. Yeah, I hadn't considered the idea of the influence on others, not just the act of giving itself. But of course, in everything that we do as leaders, it's as much about influencing those around us, not just the person who's in.
And it's abundance versus scarcity again, right? It's like you in that moment you're saying, I choose the abundant world. It's all about the stories we're telling each other in our heads.
What would you say to those leaders out there who would tell you that it's you're just soft, it's ineffective, it takes ages, just tell them what you want, when you need it, how fast they can do it? What would you say to a leader who's still in that mindset to combat that ideology? What would you say?
Well, the first half of Kind is a whole bunch of research that really points to the fact that if you want to drive performance, and if that's what you're interested in, then kindness needs to be a very big part of your strategy. So I don't see kind as soft whatsoever. A really good example of that would be if you think about the contrasting styles of Jacinda Ardern and some of the leaders that we had through the COVID crisis, right? So Jacinda Ardern very, deliberately led with kindness, but she was anything but soft, right? So she really fronted up to the truth. She had this real commitment to the truth. She said, this is going to be really hard. I believe in the people of New Zealand. We will get through this. We'll choose kindness in the way that we do it. But we're going to lock down right now. This is going to be tough. We're going to do this. She was decisive, very strong. And actually, that's pretty badass to do that. And when you think about the alternative is we got in the UK, it was, well, I'm shaking hands with everybody. It's fine. And that was a very nice response to COVID. That was telling people what they want to hear. And what Jacinda Ardern people did with her people is told people what they need to hear. You had Donald Trump saying there'll be a vaccine along soon. Almost like this. What people want to hear in that moment is like there's going to be some magical thing that's going to save us. And Jacinda said we don't have an answer yet, so we're going to be really decisive. So I think we should get away from thinking that kindness is about soft. I think the Jacinda example is, that was really brave. It was really bold, and actually really badass. A lot of the other examples of leaders who weren't decisive, didn't follow that kind of path, was actually the kind of nice version to Jacinda's kind. So I think if you're putting truth at the center of stuff, if you're really using kindness to build that psychological safety, what you'll find is the evidence points to better collaboration, more innovation, more productivity, better retention levels, and higher profit levels. So all of that, you can track that in the first half of the book, back to kindness and empathy. And so if you're someone that's about driving performance, it's not choosing between performance and kindness; it's using kindness to drive performance.
Yeah. Do you think it's a higher value leadership skill, and therefore that's why some people struggle in that you have to invest your time, you have to invest in building a culture of kindness in order to see the benefits from a productivity perspective and a cultural perspective? You can't just turn it on overnight; it becomes disingenuous. It takes time. Is that a challenge or a barrier to people, and therefore they just think, oh, I haven't got the time for that. I'm just going to be old school. I'm going to be 1980s leader. Do you see that?
Yeah, I do. I do see that. I interviewed James Timpson for the book, who is he's now the prisons minister in the new government, but at the time was CEO of Timpson, which is the biggest high street retailer by number of stores. So they've got stores all over the UK. And when you think about Timpson as a business, when you get your keys cut there, you get your shoes mended there. They've got some machinery, but how much is the bit of metal that you buy that's the key? Like their stock is like almost nothing. So they've got some stores, and then the only other big cost, on their accounts is people. Right? They're probably the most people-driven retailer in the UK, just because they don't really have stock. And when I talked to him about kindness, he said a couple of things. The first was, he said, I'm as hard-nosed as they come. I'm as target-driven as they come. And I just know that kindness really works. And so I do that. But what he also said was, which I thought was really interesting. So Timpson is a privately owned business. There's no shareholders. And what he said is that gives him the ability to think for the longer term. And so when we think of being unkind, he actually said to me, if I wanted to just drive results for one quarter, then I could just be really hard-nosed. I could treat people really badly. I could flog everyone to death, and probably my figures would go up for a quarter. And then people would burn out, and then people would start to walk away. But if my job is to really hit figures for this quarter, or even just for this single year, then I can do that. I can do that with a short-term strategy, and then maybe even I can walk away. But he was taking a much more long-term view. So I do think there's a kind of investment thing that comes with kindness. And so what he's built has enabled him to have this really intensely, fiercely loyal team, all really motivated, and sharing stories of kindness that builds this great culture. But they're all operating with a huge amount of autonomy, hugely profitable, and I think that takes some time to build up. So yeah, I do think there's a thing where you have to invest a little bit of time up front to get that culture right. You have to put a bit of time and effort into it, and then it pays back in spades, right? Because you get more innovation, more productivity, all the stuff I was just talking about. But yeah, you're right. Like, it takes a bit of investment up front, but I think that's different from seeing it as more time consuming. I think it can be more time consuming at the beginning, and then save you time for a long time after that.
Yeah. And I suppose you mentioned earlier, right back at the beginning, about trust, the word trust. You don't get trust overnight, do you? You have to earn that. And so that kind of plays into that element of it as well.
Yeah, and trust is gone so quickly, right? So you can build trust over years. One false move and you burn all of that trust in one go. So I think that's the other thing about trust, is it's very hard won over a long period of time, but then maintaining that trust is the thing that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Graham, we always ask our Blend members, for a question for you, and obviously this is kind of your second book. And
it's my sixth book.
Sorry, sixth book. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a long weekend, bank holiday weekend. Sixth book, and so the question from our members was, what inspired you to write Kind? Was there a personal moment that sparked it?
Okay. It's my sixth book and final book as well, by the way, because books are really hard. And yeah, I can't do that again for a very long time. Personal moments that inspired it. So I'll talk about one personal thing and one work thing. So the personal thing is, I have a son who is 11, He's incredible, but he also has some quite severe challenges. So he's got a unique chromosomal disorder. We're just off the back of 7 spinal surgeries in 3.5 years. We're doing spinal surgery every 6 months. He has autism and developmental delay. So he has a lot of challenges, but he's also like this massive vessel for kindness. So he's also just really like charismatic. Everyone wants to make him smile. He just inspires so much kindness in the people around him, and is a really kind little dude himself. So I think what's been a privilege of being his dad over the last 11 years is like, just I get to witness all of that kindness, and all the research points to the fact that when you witness kindness, you're more inspired to be kind yourself, and there's this kind of ripple effect that comes from that. It's definitely something just through him I've been really thinking about a lot, and that whole thing about the abundance mentality versus the scarcity mentality. I think a lot of that has shaped my thinking over the last few years. Being Roscoe's dad. So that's a little story that I tell at the start of the book as well, just about his ability to be this vessel for kindness. And then the work moment, there was like, sometimes you get a book where there's actually like a light bulb moment, or like the germ of the idea is formed in a moment. And for me, the moment was, I was doing a keynote about Productivity Ninja, which is my biggest selling book. And at the end of this keynote, someone right at the end said to me, okay, so you've talked about productivity, but you've also built your own business. Tell me about your own leadership style, what sets you apart, what's been the secret of your success. And it was really this question that, like, people are always really focused on the productivity and the tactics stuff and whatever. I'd never been asked this question in a keynote, so I didn't really know in this like split second moment like how to answer it. And what kind of fell out of my mouth was, well, kindness fuels everything. When you're kind, you win. It's as simple as that. And what was fascinating was the whole room split. It's a room of investment bankers, by the way. And it split kind of 80-20 in my favor, but there's like 80% of people were on Team Kind. And then the other 20% were like vehemently opposed. And it was all that like, but it's all dog eat dog. And what about Steve Jobs? He was like a real bastard to all his colleagues, and he was really successful. And like, so it's like Team Kind over here, and then like Team Screw them all and be evil over here. And what struck me about it was, number one, in a room of investment bankers, 80% of them were on my team. But number two, how much polarity it caused, and how much like division there was. And I was actually in Rome for this keynote, and so then I leave the hotel and I'm like walking around Rome, and you're walking around this city. Like, have you been to Rome, Stephen? Like, it's this city of like, every corner you turn is like human achievement after human achievement, right? It's just like everywhere. And so it really got me thinking about like human history and cooperation versus competition, all this stuff. And it was like literally this one little moment in a keynote was really the moment when I was like, okay, I've been talking about kindness internally within Think Productive for the last few years. It's been one of our values for a long time, but I think I need to step up here, and I think I need to kind of put my head above the parapet and be like, this is something that not just is something that we're doing in our company, that we really feel is a really key part of our success, but it's something that I want to just tell that story, to our clients and to everybody else. So yeah, that was like actually the sort of the moment it became a book was that. And then, Roscoe being the vessel for kindness is probably the kind of bigger sort of philosophical thing that's definitely, shaped me in all kinds of ways, actually. But yeah.
Thanks, Graham. I think so often, as a big proponent of kindness in the workplace, so often you find that people who have lives like Roscoe, who have challenges and things in their lives that most of us don't face, they are the ones who embody kindness more than anyone else. And it's like, if they can do it, bloody hell, we can do it. And if they can bring it to life so vehemently, then in your fourth Teams meeting of the day, when someone says something uncomfortable, you can manage it. That's the case. Graham,
it's also not just kindness, right? It's also like with him, resilience, charisma, spark, like so many of those traits that, like, when you're having a busy day and you're a bit stressed, you can you can abandon those traits a little bit, can't you? Or you can just get a bit sort of beating yourself up, or a bit feeling sorry for yourself. And so he's definitely a bit of an inspiration in all kinds of ways.
Yeah, great. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. The last thing we ask from you, Graham, thank you. I've really loved this conversation, and we always ask our our guests, when they join us on the podcast, for a recommendation, something that you find helps you as a leader, as you in your leadership journey, to share. It could be a book, it could be an experience, it frankly could be anything. Of course, we recommend your current book or any of the other 5. But what would you recommend to leaders as something that you hold dear in your own leadership journey?
Okay, put me on the spot here.
We do try.
Yeah, okay. So I'll go slightly curveball maybe with this one. So there's a book that really hit me hard by a really brilliant writer called Atul Gawande, and the book is called Being Mortal. So he's written another book which I really like. It's called The Checklist Manifesto, which is more of a kind of sort of like a kind of productivity and sort of habit kind of based book, all about his experiences as a medical doctor. But he's a medical doctor who deals with a lot of trauma surgery and also deals a lot of end of life care. And so this book, Being Mortal, is really about what are the questions that we ask when someone knows that they have a limited period of life left, whatever that limit looks like. And so it's really a book about how do we die, and what is important in that process of dying. But because it's about how do we die, it's about how do we live. And so that book for me is, I just think it's so beautifully written, and it's got this real kind of like sense of empathy within it. So I think it's just a really interesting book because it reminds us that the things that might be important to me in my life might not be the things that are important to you in your life. And it just, it's one, actually I've returned to it a couple of times and read it a couple of times because I think it's a really important reminder of there are some really important things that we need to hang on to in this world. It's not a business book, but it's probably one of the best written and most inspiring and hard-hitting non-fiction books I've ever read, for sure.
Graham, thank you. I think I've not read that book, so it's definitely going to go on my list. And I think it goes full circle to what we talked about today, which is you started with the first piece of advice for people was to look at ourselves. And I think, if you're asking those questions at the end of your life, they're probably questions we should have asked ourselves earlier in our life, I'm guessing. And so knowing yourself and knowing the type of leader you want to be and the type of person you want to be is, I'm sure, incredibly important. Graham, thank you so much. I've absolutely loved our conversation today. And thank you for coming and sharing your time with the Blend community and our members across the world. Those of you who haven't, I've just signed up for the Rev Up the Week email that you guys send out on a Sunday. So if members want to, we'll stick the link in the chat below for anyone who wants to sign up and hear from you guys at a Sunday to set you off on the right foot when you head into your Monday.
Yeah, it's a really important thing. So I always write it during that week. I never batch them up. I never use AI to dial it in. So it's often something that's kind of culturally or politically kind of relevant, or just something that's going on in the world of work. But the idea is it's like, just one idea, sort of positive or productive, to just fuel your week. So it goes out every Sunday evening, and it's grahamallcott.com to sign up.
Great. Graham, thank you so much. I've loved chatting to you, and I'm sure we're going to see you, I think, in the not too distant future at a Blend member event here in the UK. So thank you for doing that, and we'll speak to you again very soon. Thanks for today's conversation.
Great to be here. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Graham. Make sure you subscribe to the 4 Forward channel so you don't miss any new episodes. I'll see you soon.